you will want to do. So what do you think of the article? Pretty awesome article, huh? I mean, we really would want you to read anything that wasn't helpful or stellar. And hopefully you saw some of the things we talked about with language acquisition come out in this article. And I think it really speaks to, the classroom teacher and in the ESL setting. So what we've been trained with, those of you who have been to Susanna Dutro's training, and our focus in Oregon the last couple of years have been on sentence frames, right? And then we see that a lot in ESL classes, and there's nothing wrong with sentence frames. We are fine with sentence frames in Project Lab. But what Marcia Brechtel would say to you is possibly that can fossilize. She used to talk a lot about this concept of fossilization. And we don't want to fossilize our students, meaning pigeon them into, if you're an early intermediate and you go to the early intermediate class and you only talk about early intermediate sentence frames and you only have early intermediate vocabulary language, that's what she's kind of talking about with this fossilization. So she would say, maybe consider starting with the question. And that's going to open up that dialogue for that student if they're super, super into insects and you're studying insects. They might be able to produce early advanced language for you and not be fossilized with just early intermediate. Does that make sense? So we're just providing in Project Lab that additional concept. Yes, use sentence frames are great, but also consider the question. And did you love that graph of the blooms and the levels of proficiency? Yeah. So we're going to play with that more as the week goes on. And you'll see us do a strategy with English learners using that and seeing where they top out. So not coming in saying, I'm only going to speak to you with this language level. We're going to start at the beginning and go as high as you can go, pushing your language as high as we can go, using those levels of questioning. So this has a lot of application for classroom teachers as you look at what chunks of information you're going to provide. Also consider what questions you want to ask your ESL kids, or all your kids. And so hopefully you enjoyed that article, and that's one you want to definitely tuck away and share with others. I really like it. A couple other key people in the field of language acquisition to note, and then we're going to move on. And right now I'm on page 5, section 1 still. Just a couple, again, Stephen Krashen, foundational, went over his theories. And also we mentioned Jim Cummins. He is a Canadian language researcher and came up with this issue, this concept of not just the comprehensible input that Stephen Krashen talked about, but this concept of comprehensible output. Meaning students need an opportunity to discuss, use cooperative learning, and each other to have comprehensible output and opportunity to talk and share. And so what you're going to see is lots and lots of opportunities for comprehensible output in a Project Lab classroom. Kids are constantly talking. They're sitting in groups similar to how you're sitting. Groups of 4 or 5. 3 is better than 5 actually. And colored table teams. You notice everybody has a different color on their team. And we refer to groups as teams. There's a difference between sitting in a group and sitting in a team. And we want kids to be part of the team. And so you feel more scaffolded, and that's a huge scaffolding piece to provide comprehensible output, is when you're working in a team. His book here that discusses some of those things. Vygotsky, we all remember from teacher school, right? Vygotsky talked about the zone of proximal development. Remember that guy? He is the one who talked about that, but he also said we develop our linguistic competence through our linguistic interaction. We develop our cognition through our linguistic interactions with others. That's how we get smart, is by talking to each other. It's critical your kids are sitting in teams. It's critical we get them talking to each other constantly. How we've been having you do pairs, in teams, in groups. It's how we construct meaning. If Eric and I just began to talk at you through this entire training and never gave you what we're calling a 10-2, an opportunity to talk and turn to a partner, you'd probably start doing it anyway. One, we're teachers and we're kind of bad about that. And two, it's how you learn. You eventually have to turn to a partner and go, this is how this applies to me. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I see applying to my life or my setting. It's how you construct meaning, and we cannot ignore that piece for our ELLs. Paulo Freire was the Brazilian exiled educator who talked about experiential and critical approaches to language teaching. He talked a lot about if you tap into the interests of the learner, again, they're going to be able to produce a whole lot more language for you. Kind of the first graders talking about bugs is something they're pretty jazzed about, and they're going to be able to produce a lot of language. Kagan and Long talking about cooperative learning and negotiating for meaning. You know, Spencer Kagan has his principles of cooperative learning. I'm sure you've been to a workshop of his before. And we use that jigsaw structure quite a bit from him. And then Bremen we've talked about, and Rutherford, that academic discourse. So again, this point of guided oral practice is what we call it in GLAD. Bremen calls it, or Cummins called it negotiating for meaning. In Project GLAD, we call that guided oral practice. There's an entire component of strategies that are dedicated to guided oral practice, that opportunity to negotiate for meaning. I just had some input come in from teacher. How am I going to make sense of that and have it come out? There's an entire component, because sometimes we go from teaching to assessing a little too quickly. We need to have this whole opportunity for guided oral practice for students to hear the language with phonemic awareness, hear the sounds of the language, negotiate for meaning, and have comprehensible output. And that happens through academic discourse. So if you're not sold already, wait till you see the demo and see the kids, how they scaffold and support each other. And it's just, we have to. Gone are the days we can sit in rows. They have to be talking to each other. They have to be sitting in groups and supporting each other. The quote I love the best is a little guy in a training in Longview, and he says, my favorite thing about this week is you gave me a team, and I always wanted a team. I know, we were all bawling in the background. But and the ironic thing is he was sitting in groups when we came in. The teacher had had groups all year, but they weren't a team. They didn't have that interdependence, and we're going to talk more about that. There's a study, just to mention, by Kate Kinsella, and I think this will interest Nicole a little bit. You've probably seen this, Nicole, is she did a study looking at the engagement of ELLs during their school day, basically followed ELLs around in their school day. What she found was only 4% of English learners spent engaging in talk, 4% of their day. 2% was spent on speaking about lesson content and relevant academic language. And I know Nicole is interested in this. Could you want to talk a little about what you're going to do? Are you still thinking of doing that with your study?
No, I haven't. I put that on the back.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Because Nicole's very interested. She's an excellent ESL teacher and is considering doing some similar research here in Reynolds on the amount of student taught our ELLs participated, which I think we should all encourage her to do, because that would be really awesome. And even to compare types of strategies and language people are using. But basically, this is what is happening nationally for our ELLs. We're not spending the amount of time that students need in academic discourse and comprehensible output. So, that was a lot. Talk to the person next to you. What is the importance of students processing opportunities? Why is that critical? What did you learn from the article? What did you learn from this little review of language acquisition? When you're done with your 10-2, Eric's going to take us into some primary language pieces. So talk to the person next to you about that.
You have to share.
Are wish I could listen in on their conversations because I think that would be